Welcome to another 21 Hats Dashboard brought to you by our sponsor, The Great Game of Business. I'm Lauren Feldman, and I'm here with Sean Bussey, who is CEO and founder of Kinesis, which is based in Portland, Oregon, and works with small businesses on marketing, culture, and strategy. Welcome back to Dashboard, Sean.
Hey, good to be here, Lauren. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. Sean, you recently wrote a piece you called Rethinking Your Value Model, that kind of slots businesses into three categories based on how they deliver value to their customers. And in the piece, you then go on to explain why this is important, why it matters. You've talked about this some on the podcast, but I got to admit, I didn't fully get it until I read your piece just recently. I thought it was really interesting. Can you, I'd love to dig into it a little bit deeper. Can you start by identifying those three categories and tell us a little bit about what you're thinking?
Yeah, sure. And just to kind of give some context here, I've been in business this will be 25 years this coming January. And when I came across this idea of a value model, I had never heard of it in my entire career.
I was going to ask. I had not heard of it either. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, you've been at this a lot longer than me too, in terms of the business press. So what the idea is that lots of companies know what their business model is, which I like to say loosely is sort of a combination of customer profile, your financial model, the market and industry you're in. It's an amalgam, almost like a canvas. There's a great book called Business Model Canvas that I like to use as a framework for business model. But underneath a business model is a layer that's really not discussed and is almost as important, maybe even more so. And it's called the value model. And the value model is exactly that, how you deliver value to your customer. And the three types of value model are chains, networks, and shops. So do you want me to describe what they are, or do you want to just
please take us through it. Give us an example for each of those. What are they?
Yeah. So start with the easy one, chain. We've all heard the expression, the value chain. It's such a common term that comes out of the world of manufacturing. So any business that assembles things or combines things from various components into some sort of like a finished good is a value chain. And value chains behave in a very linear fashion, and they're really concerned with efficiency, predictability, and risk mitigation. Our country was built on manufacturing, so you can understand why the value chain is actually the dominant ideology that's out there. And then the second one, the value network, we've all become more aware of value networks in the last, say, 20 years. A value network is one in which you connect a high number of buyers to a high number of sellers. And the value network is usually the intermediary. So a good example of that would be like Google. Google sells ads to businesses. Google has users who do searches, large numbers of buyers, large numbers of sellers, and Google connects those to each other. The idea with a network is scale. You got to have scale to be a value network generally. And then the last one is what's called a value shop. And Kinesis is a value shop. Value shops solve usually hard problems for customers that they can struggle with to DIY. Lots of businesses are value shops and they don't actually know it. An example of a value shop would be a law firm or a medical practice, an auto body mechanic, where the problems that are brought in the door are different from client to client to client. And the value of a value shop is that they have enough experience over time to where they can see patterns in problems and they can combine solutions from past customers and assemble them into an answer that has usually a disproportionate value to the amount of time that they can put into it. So that's the third type, is a value shop. And I could go on and on about that.
Well, let me ask you about that, because it feels to me like there are probably some distinctions between companies that you just categorize as value shops. So it's clear to me how you at Kinesis would be a value shop. You're doing custom work. You're dealing with problems that are different with every client. But is that also true of a law firm or an auto mechanic? I mean, yes, every car is different, but the challenges are going to be similar. Everybody who comes in and needs a will at a law firm. Tell me how you draw the distinctions there.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine where in some industries, you have wide disparity of how shop oriented the business is. So if I was a law firm and I was doing, say wills and probate, that's not necessarily the highest level of complexity, although it does require a fair degree of expertise. And so that information asymmetry where the solution provider knows a lot more than you, the buyer, it does exist there. But if you get into the realm of like, say, business law, as a law firm, that is really highly divergent and complex arena. You could be dealing with contracts, you could be dealing with negotiations, you could be dealing with disputes. And, your knowledge of these diverse arenas, when a client comes to you, and your ability to solve their problem is usually experience related, and usually there's a big gulf of difference between their knowledge and your knowledge, and so your ability to add value is very, very high in that case. I would say an easier one to be like that's not a real value shop would be like a CPA firm. In theory, a CPA firm should talk to you about, your goals and objectives around finance and your earning potential and tax and so forth. But the vast majority of CPA firms actually, they sort of behave like chains processing tax returns in a very almost automated way. And I think those businesses are actually the ones that need to fear AI the most. So yeah, does that help? Kind of.
That makes sense. Yeah, that does help. So I think I got it. Just to recap, chains are kind of our manufacturing, networks are kind of marketplaces, and value shops are doing more custom work.
Right.
I guess my next question for you then is, why does this matter? Because a lot of people listening to this may not have heard this terminology before, but they probably know what their basic business model was. So how does this help?
Yeah. So, and why this is so eye-opening to me was that I realized that the vast majority of consulting and advice, especially business literature, was founded on studies and the sort of philosophy of the value chain. So if you look at, let's take the E-Myth as a good example, right? Very popular book. One point in everybody's entrepreneurial career, they fall in love with the E-Myth.
I got to work on the business, not in the business.
All right. Yeah. On and on and on. Everything should be a system. You should make people infinitely replaceable by having a user guide for every process in your business. Well, what does that sound like, Lauren? Right? He's telling you how to set up a factory that repeats the same thing over and over again. He's sort of saying, build your business to be like McDonald's. In fact, he talks about McDonald's as like the ultimate business. If I were to run my business like that, it would fall apart, right? We have diverse problems that come in the door. We have a diverse crew of people with different skills. There's no cogs in the machine. So that's just one example of a book that's really written from a chain-based ideology. It's written to, systematize and standardize things. And there are plenty of businesses that would benefit from that idea. And it's not to say that Kinesis doesn't have systems, but also our value is through the diversity of what we do. It's through a problem we see today that we've never seen before. And by solving it, we might add $1 million, $10 million, $50 million of value to the customer. I can point to customers where we have delivered tens, probably hundreds of millions of dollars of value over time by solving pretty hard problems. And there's no user's manual that's going to tell me how to solve that problem. And so when I realized that most books are actually written for chains, it started to make me re-examine all the things that I took for granted in terms of how I was, quote unquote, supposed to run the business.
Interesting. All right, so that's a great example, and a lot of why this matters. A lot of the advice you're getting may be aimed at a slightly different kind of business,
a radically different business, Lauren. I'm not saying slightly here.
Yeah.
Like you're talking. A chain cares about risk mitigation, predictability, controlling inputs and outputs. I don't. I care about exponential returns for my clients. I care about solving unique problems that never existed before. I care about hiring people that have unique skills and are very different. So that's really, really different ideologically than a business that thinks of like people as cogs in a machine. And I know that, culture has changed a lot in terms of corporate America. But if you look at a lot of corporations, mega corporations especially, they really are treating humans as cogs in the machine. And I think that's a huge opportunity for small businesses to begin with. But looking at where does that come from in the first place? It's coming from a factory mindset. So there's so many good answers for how you can behave differently to create a better culture. I mean, the kind of culture we have at Kinesis, the kind of culture we help our clients build, where really low turnover, super high levels of engagement.
Well, let me ask you about that and your experience at Kinesis.
Yeah,
did you?
Sure.
Anybody who's listened to this podcast knows that you had a shift in your business model some time back, and you've definitely, now that we know the term value shop, it's clear you've moved in that direction. My question for you is, were you running the business previously and then you heard, oh, there's this thing called a value shop, that's what I want to be, and shift your business then? Or did you shift and move in that direction because that's what made sense for your business, and then later learned, oh, I just created a value shop?
I mean, I think I'm a lot like a lot of entrepreneurs, where we operate intuitively first and then we write the narrative later. So like, sure. I started my career in an advertising agency, and in hindsight, they were set up like a chain. They were trying to sell as many ads as possible, consistently and predictably as possible. They treated their employees like they were cogs in the machine, and the goal was to sell more ads. The goal wasn't actually to solve the client's problem. The goal was to sell ads to make margin and markup on the ads. And so when I built Kinesis, I was like, that seems really stupid. Why don't we solve problems? And so I was like, that's when I got into branding, and I got into positioning and messaging, and then later on culture and employee engagement. Because what I was trying to solve for was like, how do you build a resilient, powerful, owner-run business? Like, that's the problem I was obsessed with. Partly because that's what I was doing, but also it's like my family did that, like I care about this really intimately. And so I was trying to solve that problem. I was setting up a value shop. I just didn't know what to call it. The problem is I was operating on a lot of legacy ideas like eMyth and elsewhere, where I was using chain-based stuff like, hourly billing rates. That's a great example of a factory mindset. We were using hourly billing rates. We don't do that anymore because the value you deliver is not tied to the amount of time you work on something. It's usually tied to your experience. And so there's a lot of tension in arenas like, say, in marketing, where they're charging by hourly rates, or they're paying their employees on hourly rates when, who knows, they might be solving problems very quickly. So these are examples of that. If you go into any professional services business that tracks their time, and you ask any employee, how much do you like tracking your time? You will get almost universally, I hate it. And I think part of the reason for that is like, well, we want to do the work. We don't want to track our time. But the other part of it is like, really creative people, they don't work in a linear time-based fashion. Really creative people solve problems, while they're dreaming, or while they're walking, or suddenly out of the blue. And so that's where the time-based tracking it falls apart. It doesn't work.
So the alternative is you want to be paid for your expertise. How have you found your customers respond to that? Are they okay if they bring you a problem that you have the expertise to solve quickly, but want to be paid well for?
It depends on the buyer. You know, what I've discovered is that I do really well selling to other value shops, like
Interesting.
other like engineering firms, for example, and certain types of engineering firms. So like automation engineering or robotics engineering or some building systems engineers. These are all value shops and they're solving really hard problems for their customers. And so when I talk to them in a language that they understand, that value is asymmetric, they tend to vibe with that. And so we'll put fixed base pricing to things and they're okay with it. On the other hand, when I run into highly commoditized chain-based businesses, they do not like us. They want to like ask us what our hourly rate is, and they want to, line item invoices and all this kind of nonsense that doesn't actually make sense for our business, but it's how they operate. And it's often how they're bought too. And so I've kind of come to learn that certain types of buyers make better customers, partly because they empathize and they get what you're doing. So the more problem solving oriented a business is, it doesn't have to be a value shop, but the more they think through the lens of like, how do I creatively solve problems, the easier it is to have those discussions. And I mean, it's been very liberating for us to shift to these value-based fixed fee models because clients know exactly what they're going to pay for. They know what the results are going to be, and they can plan accordingly. It's a lot like hiring an employee, right? When you hire an employee, you expect them to do certain things, but a lot of it is an investment in potential, and you never know. Like a really good employee can transform your business in powerful and amazing ways. And so I talk about that a lot with clients.
It does seem like the kind of thing where if you're dealing with the right client, both parties to this negotiation could be much happier with a non-hourly fee. I'm thinking dealing with a law firm. A lot of businesses are scared to death of how those fees can mount if you're being charged by the hour. A lot of people would prefer to be told, this is what I'm going to do. This is what it's going to cost. Is that what you find?
Yeah, I think the legal firm the legal industry is undergoing a pretty big transformation. It's got a lot of problems with it, and it's an unsustainable model because of costs and aging partners. And I think what you put your finger on it, like, I don't want to pick up the phone and talk to my attorney for like 15 minutes and get a $500 bill. So then I don't make that call, and then it ends up costing me, $50,000 because of a lawsuit. So I think there's a real problem with the incentives you create when you're saying to a client effectively, be careful, if you touch that phone, it's like lava, like you're going to really regret it. So I think you got to start to align those incentives with how you charge and what you're going to produce for those results. And I try to find as an example, I try to find attorneys who will do a fixed fee for the type of activity they're doing. And I realize you can't do that for every type of law practice, especially litigation can be a lot of unknowns. But the more you do something that is within a certain realm of expertise, the more opportunity you have to kind of get tighter on what the pricing is and to be clear with the customer so that there are no surprises. It's part of our secret to having these long-term relationships is, the clients, they think of us like a valuable employee, and the way they pay us is very similar to an employee. And just like an employee, we'll hit a home run, in the second quarter, and then the third quarter, not much is like working, and then the fourth quarter, we do something amazing. So it's asymmetric in terms of the return. When you start to look at the average of those returns, it's much, much higher than other models like hourly rates, where a lot of perverse incentives with that.
I see all the advantages to being a value shop, but do you feel as though you've also paid something of a price for being a value shop? By definition, you're doing custom work. It limits the number of clients you can have. In a perfect world, would you want to create an AI software program that could lead customers through the same process that you do individually for each of them and then be able to serve a lot more people?
I mean, there are trade-offs. you'll notice that private equity isn't buying value shops right and left. It doesn't scale very well. It's a hard business to scale. People in a value shop business, people are incredibly important. They're not easily replaced with AI if they're doing true value shop work, right? You're combining years and years of expertise, and then sometimes you're creating new solutions that have never existed before. And that's a lot of our secret sauce, is that most clients are getting new solutions. So it's not like we're, replicating what has worked before as a best practices model. That's one way to work. But we're like creating new things, like in the realm of innovation, because that's where the most exponential return exists. You can't really AIify that. You can AIify best practices. You can totally do that. Like you can ask AI, hey, what's a good SEO strategy for, somebody in the, plumbing industry. But you couldn't ask AI, hey, I guess you could, but it's not going to give you a good answer. What's a new revenue stream that has not existed before for this plumbing business? It's only going to know what's been known, right? So those are the advantages and disadvantages. And the customer base for me, quite frankly, is pretty small. I'm going to work with clients who really care about the long term. Value shops, often our solutions, they take a while to manifest, but when they do, they kind of hit it out of the park. So you have to have a high level of trust with a client, and a client has to have a strong vision. And I promise you, not every business owner has a strong vision, and not every business owner has a high level of trust. So it limits who I can work with, but I'm okay with that. My people are out there, and they're really fun to work with.
Do you have any advice for someone listening to this who is realizing for the first time, hey, I'm a value shop, I didn't know that?
Yeah, it's really exciting when you start to learn this, because it's a little bit like taking a personality test for the first time. You're like, oh, this is who I am, and then you can actually start to think about how you would change your business. And I think that, in the paper we wrote, we talk about kind of the key areas that value shops really need to pay attention to. Those are really areas like branded marketing, people and culture, innovation, how you work in these areas. And then I would start to really self-examine and say, what am I doing that feels like it was designed to work in a factory, to work in the walls of a predictable system? And that's, I think, where the opportunity is to kind of start to re-examine those choices. I want my accounting to be run like a factory. That's okay. I want best practices in my finances, but how we charge our clients, we've absolutely reinvented that, several times over, and it's gotten better and better. It's very, very different than how a lot of other service companies charge, how we do the work, how we plan for the work, how we communicate with clients. We've really had to kind of build a lot of these things from scratch, because all the advice is just bad. It's not bad. It's not for us.
Right.
And so that's what I would say to folks, is like, look really carefully, because, like I said, this idea, it came about in the 80s through a Norwegian business school. And I hate to say it, but the Norwegian business school doesn't have a lot of brand cachet at Harvard, or Wharton. So like the idea, it never made its way into the mainstream. And so as a consequence, we've just been operating under these sort of like unspoken agreements that all businesses act like a factory, when there are businesses that, they don't really behave like a factory, nor should they operate like one.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad you wrote the piece you wrote. Again, it's called Rethinking Your Value Model. I'm going to include a link in it. This is Monday. I'm going to have a link to the piece in today's morning report. Anybody who doesn't get that can just email me, and I'll be happy to send you the link. But I'm really glad we had a chance to dig a little bit deeper into this. Sean Bussey is CEO of Kinesis, which is based in Portland, Oregon, and works with small businesses on marketing, culture, and strategy. This episode was brought to you by The Great Game of Business, which helps businesses use an open book management system to help build healthier companies. You can learn more at greatgame.com. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Lauren. That was fun.
Appreciate it. Have a good week, everybody.